So here's how it goes. God talks to Moses through the burning bush. Moses is then going to convey what God says to Aaron. Aaron is then going to go with Moses to the Israelites, share the story of how God hears and sees them. They're all really excited. They then go and take that same message to Pharaoh. And God tells Moses, who tells Aaron, who tells Pharaoh, let my people go. And Pharaoh says, I don't know you, Aaron. I don't know this guy, Moses. And I definitely don't know this guy who you call God. Get out of my sight. And in the whole time, he gets so mad, he calls the Israelites lazy. The Israelites are then forced to do more work than ever before because now while they have the same quota of bricks to make, now they have the straw that they have to gather. This, of course, puts them in a difficult predicament because they can't meet the quota and now they're getting beaten. They go to Pharaoh and they say, hey, Pharaoh, this isn't our fault. It's your guys' fault because they're not supplying us with the straw anymore. And Pharaoh says, it's not my guy's fault. And it's certainly not my fault. It's your fault because you're lazy people. And by the way, you can thank the brothers Moses and Aaron for bringing this upon you. Then the Israelites go to Moses and Aaron and say, why have you done this? You have made us a stench. We are getting beaten. We're being required to do things that we can't possibly do. And so what's next? God spoke to Moses, who spoke to Aaron, who spoke to Pharaoh, went to the Israelites, back to Pharaoh, back to Moses, and now we have Moses who's going to go back to God. And I want you to hear what Moses says to God in verse 22 of Exodus chapter 5. Moses returned to the Lord and said, O Lord, why have you brought trouble upon this people? Is this why you sent me? Think about that for just a second. Is that a rhetorical question? Is that a legitimate question? Moses says to God, God, I ran away from these people 40 years ago to go hide in the desert. You dragged me back, and now those who didn't even know me then now hate me now. Is this why you called me? And I want us to sit for a moment in that tension of knowing that we were called by God to do something, and then when we do what He's called us to do, things get worse. This is not Moses the hero. This is not Moses, we're walking across on dry land. This is not Moses who with God brought down the 10 Commandments, who made the Israelites God's people. This is Moses, the one who has made the Israelites a stench. And we only see this for a few verses, but can you imagine the trauma and pain this caused Moses? As a few verses earlier, they were worshiping God, and now they're coming back to Moses and saying, how dare you ruin it for us? It would have been better if you were never born. Now, those weren't their exact words, but you can imagine that was the sentiment that Moses felt. Does Moses have a right to feel betrayed? That's an honest question. He has a reason to feel betrayed. What would be the reasoning? Why can Moses legitimately feel betrayed? The reaction of the people? Again, God didn't say, you're going to walk into Pharaoh's court and you're going to say, let my people go. And Pharaoh is going to say, okay, good, have at it. But he also didn't seem to talk about how this is going to impact Moses socially, emotionally, psychologically. Can you imagine the fear of walking in but saying, you know what, I have this staff, I have God, He's made a promise. You walk in, people are getting excited. They're like, we're worshiping a God who hears us and a God who sees our suffering. You go to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh says, I don't think so. And before long, the people who you went to save are people who say, you have made us a stench, just leave. Go back to the desert. Go back to the sheep. Go back living your life and doing whatever it is you're doing. Just don't do it here and don't ruin it for us. You are a pariah. You are a plague. We want you gone. Really? This is, and Moses has reluctantly, but Moses has done what God asked him to do. And what did that get him? Anger, hatred, hateful words for the people that he didn't even ask for this. He didn't say, God, I'm looking for something to do. God came to him and said, here's what I want you to do. And it landed Moses into all sorts of trouble. Verse 23, ever since I went to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has brought trouble upon this people, and you have not rescued your people at all. I kind of think Moses is drawing a line a little bit. Do you hear what's going on? He says, ever since you sent me to speak in your name, Yahweh, I am who I am. I will be who I will be. Ever since I walked in and I used your name, Pharaoh has done all the work. He's done all the pushing, the bullying, and we're left with a people who hates me. And guess what, God? You know what you've done? Nothing. You have not delivered your people. Julie. He told him he wouldn't listen to him. But is it fair that Moses is getting this treatment? I mean, wasn't he called by God? I mean, he was reluctant. He didn't say, you know what, I want a big position, God. God came to him and said, here, I want you to deliver my people. Is this looking good for Moses? It's not looking good for Moses. It's not looking good for Israel. And if you read verse 23, that the way I read it, it's not looking good for God. Basically, Moses says, you've done nothing. Pharaoh has done something. You haven't done anything. Yeah, I'm being blamed, but you're the one who's not holding up your end of the bargain. And so I want to talk a little bit more about this idea of why. Okay, so I kind of kicked the shins of the medical profession a little bit earlier. Truth be told, I have never in Hobbs, never had a terrible experience. My family has been to the hospital 3 times for a gallbladder surgery, a delivery, and a knee replacement or whatever. Wyatt had a torn ACL, and they were nothing but amazing. And while I don't specifically have a doctor, I can recommend Norley Clinic, which is on Del Paso, about a block away from my house. Nicest people ever. I love them. They're great. I don't have any problem with the doctor. I don't have any problem with the procedures. I understand there are inherent risks, and I get that there's waiting. I mean, it's kind of how it goes. And so I want to talk about a few things as to why you might put up with waiting rooms and unknown bills and guarantees. How about this? Silicone hydrogel polymers. Does anybody know what that is? 40 years ago, the universal sign for panic was when somebody was down on all fours looking on the ground. What just happened? Even worse, they're looking for their contact. Can you remember those days? Can you remember the days of the tiny little hard contact? And if it fell out, everybody said, don't move, because it wasn't soft. If you stepped on that thing, it shattered. And it would take 2 months and several $100s to repair that. What happens if you lose a contact now? You go get another daily contact that you pull out from your supply of 50 of them you have in your cabinet. Like, is that not amazing, people? Think about this. Like, 100 years ago, like, if you couldn't see well, you couldn't see well. We now have, I got to look it up again, silicone hydrogel polymers, which is what makes up our contacts that we use today. It is amazing that you can put this tiny little piece of silicone rubbery, I don't know really what, you put it in your eye. Think about how crazy that is, and all of a sudden you can see things. I just got me a new pair of glasses. My prescription was getting worse, and I'm sad to say that this will be the last pair of glasses that I own that don't have a line underneath them. It's awful. I cannot, in a matter of 6 months, Carolyn, 6 months, I went from being able to read to now I do this. If I want to read, I have to lift up my glasses. Now, I see better. I don't understand it. And my doctor told me, if you can't see, take off your glasses. But it's amazing that, like, I take these things off, I cannot read that huge sign at the back there. That thing is probably 1-foot letters. I can't read that. I put this on, and I'm pretty sure I could see a gnat landing on that sign from here. It's so fantastic that we have contacts and lenses. Prosthetic legs. I mean, they can make them look just like a human leg. They're actually creating for amputees prostheses that are connecting to nerves that allow a hand to function similar to what we're doing now. It may not look quite the same. We're not to the Star Wars where Luke has his hand cut off and he puts it back. It's not there yet, but it is fantastic. Have you seen the prosthetic legs that they use for elite athletes who perform? I mean, it's like this metal, almost looks kind of like a big metal banana almost. It's shaped like that, and they can run faster than I could ever run with the legs that I have right now. It is amazing that people who were at one time handicapped amputees who would be in a wheelchair for the rest of their life are now training for the Olympics. And they can outrun people who would have on just a normal set of legs. It's pretty fantastic. I wouldn't call these things normal. Or how about pacemakers? I don't understand the science. I don't understand the medicine. But if you have a heart that is out of rhythm, they can cut you open and implant a device that allows it to stay in rhythm. And if you don't understand the importance of having a heart in rhythm, ask Sammy. He'll tell you, if your heart is out of rhythm, you're weak, you can't eat very well, you can't sleep very well, nothing really works right when it's out of rhythm. They can put a device in there that helps your heart beat at the right time. And if you have issues with a heart attack, they can put a device in there, I think we just call it a defibrillator, right? That if it stops working, it can shock your heart and get it working again. In fact, some of these devices, I know someone who had one that was a little bit different, but it was battery powered. And in order to charge that thing up, you had this special device with magnets that you would place on your back, and it would align, and it would charge this unit through your skin to help keep you going. And so my question is, why don't we boycott and stop going to the doctor's office? Why do we say, I'm not going to deal with insurance anymore? Ooh. I'm not going to mess with the weight, and I want this guarantee. Why don't we have more people who say, I'm not going to the doctor until he starts to wait for me? Because in waiting, there's the implication of trust and hope. Why do we wait at the doctor's office? Because we trust that he or she is going to do their very best to take care of us. And we have hope that the pains that we have can be remedied by altering our diet at their suggestion, or by taking some medication, or by avoiding certain foods. We hope that by seeing them, change will be enacted in our lives. It's why we wait for the doctor. And it's why we wait for God. Because we trust that God will take care of us. That He hears our cries, that He sees our suffering, and we have hope that He will act. You see, I'm not convinced that waiting is some evil byproduct of the process when it comes to serving God. I don't think it's a problem. I think waiting for God quite possibly can be the cure. Because when we wait for God, we are trusting and we are hoping. So I want to back away and I want to talk about something that I kind of on the forefront sounds completely different. Like we're changing directions all the way, and maybe we are, but I'm not really 100% sure that we are. I think we can bring these two trains back together. But think about this. Why does God call people to sacrifice? It starts from almost the very beginning. I mean, we know by the second generation, Cain and Abel are both making sacrifices, okay? Why would God call people to make sacrifices? What's the benefit? Testing your faith? Why do we make sacrifices today? Why does God call us to give today? To test our faith? Okay. Okay. Okay, so let me ask you this. Let's talk numbers for a second. Okay, let me ask. I'm presupposing something that I shouldn't. So let me go back. Do you believe that everything you have came from God? Do you believe that all good things came from God? Yes or no? Okay. I want to argue that. I don't know that anybody wants to argue against me. I would love for you to, because this would be fun. But I don't think there's anybody in here who really says, no, that really is not mine. Now, maybe we struggle a little bit with that in our mind, but we won't articulate that out, especially on a Sunday morning in a church service, right? But every good thing that we have every good thing that we have comes from God, uh, even down to the money that we make. You couldn't make the money that you make if it wasn't for God. Now, do you use what God has given you in order to make that? Absolutely. We have hard workers, whether they're teaching a class or welding steel together or they're fixing people at the doctor's office. They're all using their talents, but they're using talents that God gave them. Okay, so Vaughn, you've been in practice for quite a long time, and you've done well as a doctor. But you also have to remember that you're able to be a doctor because God gave you the ability, the intellect to pass classes and pronounce words that the rest of us cannot. But it also means that you have arms and legs, which, especially in your field, would be really hard to do as a chiropractor. You couldn't do if you didn't have those, correct? So even though you can say, I work really hard for my money, ultimately you have to say, I work hard, but I've been given stuff that I didn't make up or have on my own, right? So everything you have comes from God. So when you get that paycheck, okay, and let's say it's $100, you get $100 paycheck, okay, and then God, all of that came from who? God. So that's God. He gives it to you. Why would God then turn around and say, okay, I gave you everything so that you could earn that paycheck. I want you to give some of that back. Does that not sound really weird? I gave it to you, now I want you to give it back to me. Why would God do this? What is the benefit? It builds character? Okay. Okay. If I have $100, I can buy $100 worth of whatever I want. $100 worth of food, $100 worth of junk, it doesn't matter. But when God says, I want you to give something back to me, all of a sudden He's saying, even if you want $100 worth of food, I don't want you to have all of it. But I want this new bike, and it costs $100. And if I give you some of that back, then I can't get that bike that I want. And so what do I have to do? You have to wait. I know this sounds weird, but I really believe that our giving, that our sacrifice is a form of God building our character through telling us, just wait on me. You have that money and you think you have it, but trust that I can take care of you. And hope that when you give that away, that I'm a God who sustains you. And our giving is a part of teaching our character, of learning to rely on God and saying, God, I don't have it all figured out. I can't do it all by myself. I'm giving it back to you. And when I give this to you, I'm also giving you my trust, and I will have faith that you will take care of me. It's not just a passing a few dollars or a bunch of dollars. It's about saying, I trust and rely on you. I have faith in you, and I have hope in you. It's a part of waiting for God. Lynn. Yeah. Put your money where your mouth is. Yeah. 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 Well, at least me and you do. At least we're two people in this room who. Yeah. 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 Can we have Frida's reaction stricken from the record, please? The jaw actually hit the ground. It had to be picked back up. So. Yeah. Yeah. That's what. No, I don't, because what we're not going to get is okay. So remember, we have the Israelites. But first, we have Pharaoh complains to the Israelites. You guys are lazy. You're not doing enough. Okay. Then the Israelites are going to require more work, and so what are they going to? First, they're going to complain. They're to the slave drivers, basically, says, "Why are you doing this?" Then they're going to go complain to Pharaoh. Then they're going to go complain to Moses. And then Moses is going to go complain to God. I mean, talk about the buck not stopping. It doesn't slow down. It like picks up speed. But let's go ahead and just read this, because you're going to find something else doesn't happen. Something is going to happen very differently as we open up Exodus chapter 6. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh. Because of my mighty hand, he will let them go. Because of my mighty hand, he will drive them out of his country." What does God not do? He doesn't chastise Moses. "Oh, Moses, you should know better than this." He doesn't say, "Okay, Moses, throw down the staff." He doesn't say, "Stick your hand back in your cloak, leprosy, you got to keep it there." Like, God is so kind and patient with Moses because God knew exactly what was going to happen. And I think this is the question I think we should ask over and over and over and over and over again in Exodus. Why is God working the way He's working? Why does God do this? Yeah. Yeah. I think Louise, you got a great point. I have oftentimes said, "God, will you just give me the game plan? Will you just lay it out here?" How terrible would it be if God actually did that? What if God said, "Okay, here's what's going to happen over the next 10 years." How many of you in 2010 could have handled God saying, "Okay, here's what's going to happen in the next 10 years. And by the way, in 2020, you're going to be locked up in your house. You won't be able to eat outside. You won't be able to do anything. You're going to wear a face mask, and that's going to be 2020. I'll get back to you later." Can you imagine how overwhelming that would be to have to deal with all of this? God says, "Trust me. I think over and over and over again in Exodus, God works the way He does is because He's bringing His people into relationship. And in order for that relationship to work, there has to be trust. And right now, the Israelites, Moses included, don't have a great deal of trust in God. Moses was reluctant from the get-go. By the time that Moses shows up and visits with Pharaoh, Israel says, get out of here, don't ever come back. We don't want to have anything to do with it. And God doesn't say, fine then, I'm gone. Good luck. I hope you enjoy slavery. By the way, I'm going to send a famine where there's less straw for you to find in the land, if that's how you want it to be. But God doesn't come across as spiteful. It's not like waiting was like, oh no, I can't think of anything else to do, so hang tight until I come up with a plan B. This was God's plan. He wasn't surprised at all. When Moses came and complained and says, God, why have you done this? Pharaoh's acting and you're not. Where's the deliverance you promised? God doesn't start saying, I don't know what I should do now. God was developing faith in His followers. And so I tried, my wife and I talked about this a little bit earlier. She said, well, what are you preaching on? And I said, well, I'm preaching on waiting for God. Like, we should wait for God. And I said, but for is not the right preposition. I want to find a different word, like waiting by God, waiting with God. But what if we're waiting on God's behalf? What if God says, I want you to wait, because in the waiting, I will reveal myself to you. And so we're waiting for God on His behalf, because He says, I want to have something to happen, but it needs to happen with my timing. And so I want you to wait for me. Wait for me to work. That I want you to trust my plan. This is going to work out, but I want you to trust that after 2020, I still will be God. No one really caught, I don't think, caught one of the things that Wyatt said in his communion thoughts, which I thought was pretty clever. He said, whether you're the Israelites who just witnessed the 10th plague, or you're Americans who just experienced the second one. Like, I kind of feel weird after that ice thing hit. And I thought, okay, it's one thing that first off, we have this craziness where this sickness is going around. And now we have half the country is frozen over in ice. Like, what is plague 3? I don't know. I texted my family. We were going back and forth. They're all in the Dallas area, and they have busted pipes, and they went literally days without electricity. And my text to them was, I just pray that the Lord takes me before the locusts get here. I don't know what plague 3 is going to look like. But I do know this. There were 10 plagues. You know why there were 10 plagues? It's really simple. Because God wanted 10 plagues. He didn't want 9. He didn't want 11. He knew exactly what He wanted to do. And He kept telling Moses, Moses, I will deliver you. If I'm Moses, I'm saying, let's cut it off at 4. Let's do something at 4, maybe 5, so we can go. But God was deliberate in the way that He allowed the plagues to occur, because He kept calling His people, trust me, trust me, trust me. You see the gnats that the Egyptians are swatting away? Trust me. You see the frogs? I don't know what was worse, when the frogs were alive or when all the frogs died. That could be like another plague almost, having to scoop up the dead frogs. God said, trust me. Trust me. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I, I personally wrongfully stereotype the Israelites because when I make them look bad for not following and listening to God, when what is this is falling out of heaven, that's what manna is. They pick it up, they don't know what it is, and the Hebrew word for manna is what is this? They are eating stuff that has fallen down from heaven. Quail just fall down and they're eating that. And I love to imagine, and this is terrible of me, but I love to imagine that they're mean and ungrateful and that God is doing all these miraculous signs for their benefit. They've walked across water. They're in the desert. They're being led by a pillar of fire and a pillar of cloud. And yet, and the reason why I tell myself that is because then I can say, Lynn, well, I'm not that bad. I mean, if God sent food down from heaven and it fell out my lawn and it was like sweet and tasty and I could collect it and like I never had, that would be awesome. But I have a hard life and I don't get to collect my food. I have to go out and earn it myself. And so, I have every right to be less faithful than these people are. But, but then as I reflect on my own life, I realized that I wouldn't be any different than the rest of those guys who were standing on the hot sand saying, "Did you just bring us out here because there weren't enough graves in Egypt?" And then that becomes very humbling for me. Yeah, 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 yeah. Well, that is not. I mean, honestly, this is not in our human nature to do that. I mean, I think it's hard. I think we have to really try. And the Bible, so many times, calls us, commands us to be thankful and to be joyful because that's not our natural tendency. I mean, how many times in 2020 did we sit around and say, "Man, this is a great year. I'm still alive." Like, there have been opportunities in 2020 that we never could have dreamed of. Like, how many of you in 2019 said, "I am so busy and so stressed out and my calendar is full, I would love to just spend a few days at home. If I could just have a few days at home, I really need to clean out that closet. If I just had a few days, I could clean out that closet. I could get things together." And we're at home in 2020, and what are we saying? Yeah. And I know, listen, I have kids. I know what it's like to say, I wish these kids would go back to school. In 2019, 99.99% of all children, I just made that number up. But I'm pretty close. I'm pretty sure I'm close to that. 99.99% of all kids says, "I can't stand school. It's terrible. I hate it. I wish I never had to go again." And God said, "Okay, I'll answer your prayers." And then somehow miraculously, defying all logic, 99.99% of all kids said, "I wish we could go back to school. This is so terrible. My dad is the worst principal ever. My mom's a terrible teacher, and I'm tired of looking at his screen." And then school starts to open back up. And I hear kids saying, "I wish we could have just stayed at home. It was so much easier then. We have to go to school and it's terrible. We have to walk in a line and we have to wear masks." It's like, that's just the way that we are. We're just, and in fact, just to say this, and there was a post that was on social media not too long ago about a young lady in America. who grew up with the fact that I mentioned she's from America means that she's more affluent than most people on earth. She is. Okay, she's not bearing her family out of starvation. She's not dealing with unclean water source, like all these things. And she went on this rant and basically said, I'm mad at the world. Why do bad things have to happen? She basically said, I'm a resilient, strong person because the world forced me to be that way. Why can't life be easier? That was her argument. If only life were easy, I wouldn't have to be so hard, which this is certainly not in her defense. I highly suspect that she has not gone through the trauma that most people in this room and in this world have gone through, based on what I know of her. But what gets me is that for some reason, our human nature is to say, we don't want to be stronger. We just want life to be easier. But if life is easier, who's trusting God? Why wait on God when you can do it yourself? I've talked a little bit about his book. I guess I'll recommend it with a little asterisk. I don't believe a lot of the things he says, but there's some other things that I really appreciate. Jordan Peterson I'm in the middle of his book. I guess I'm technically 5/12 through the way of his book. It's 12 Rules of Life, I think is what he calls it. And in one of his chapters, he talks about when you're raising children, he's like, do not take away all the terrible things that they're going to have. And he even talks about Snow White. Now, I hope I'm not getting the fairy tales confused. Oh, no, I'm sorry, Sleeping Beauty. I was getting them confused. Sleeping Beauty, and her parents try to completely protect her. And in doing so, they don't invite malevolent to the party. And ultimately, because they protect her, because they keep all evil out, ultimately, bad things are going to happen to her. I don't want to give away the story, but there's the needle, there's the poke, and then there's the sleeping. And what he goes on to say is, don't try to make your child's world safe. You can't do it. Don't try. If you could do it, it would be terrible because someday they are going to leave your home and it won't be safe anymore. And if your whole job was to keep them safe, it's going to get really bad. He says, don't raise safe children, raise strong children. He's like, invite malevolent to the party. Let them know things aren't always going to be easy. And he's even going to talk throughout his book, or at least through the first 5 chapters, so he has a very different view on the Old Testament and even creation. He does talk about this idea of faith all throughout, at least the first 5 chapters that I'm through. And I'll try not to bore you with the rest of it, but it's a pretty fantastic book. But he talks about how the importance of going through difficult times and building character and how that promotes faith. Because you don't have to have faith when everything works out. That's not faith. That's just it being given to you. But when God says, I'm going to send a plague, and Pharaoh's going to say, you can go, but then turn around and say he can't go, then you're going to say, who is Pharaoh and who is God? Can God really pull this off? And God's going to send another plague. And Pharaoh's going to say, get out of my sight. And then he's going to harden his heart. And he's going to say, oh, by my mighty hand, you're not leaving. And the Israelites are looking at each other and they're saying, who's got the mightier hand? Who's going to win this one? And they're going to see this go back and forth, and they're going to have struggle. And guess what they're doing the entire time? They're waiting for God. They're waiting for God. Yes. Yes, and the Israelites, both in the Old Testament and the New Testament, are a weird group of people. Okay, they're weird for one main reason, which just drives everybody else crazy. Those who are living around them, they are monotheistic. What does that mean? One God. They are almost constantly living with or near or surrounded by groups of people who are polytheistic. Okay, which means that they believe in what? Many gods. You don't find anybody in the older New Testament who doesn't believe in some form of God. Okay, but the deal is most of them believe in many gods, and the Egyptians are absolutely no exception to that. They are the rule. They believe in many gods, and one of their gods happened to be the god of the Nile. What is the first plague that God sends down on the Egyptians? He turns the water into blood. And this is where I really love the plagues, because God is going to specifically attack the Egyptians and the gods that they believe in through each individual plague. Think about this. Think about the water. They worship the Nile. How important that was to them. John, you're exactly right. He could have just said, I'm having the plague of turning you guys into salt. And they could have all frozen right then. And the Israelites could have just walked out. But he said, okay, you worship God, and this is a God who I believe loves Israelites, and a God who loves Egyptians. And a God who says, you have turned away from me and you have made your own gods. You've made this God of the Nile, and watch what happens. You know what else they also worshipped? The sun. And what's going to happen in a few chapters? What is God going to do? There will be the plague of darkness. This is God showcasing his power and saying, you have a God of the water, you have the God of the sun, you have the God of livestock. I am the God of everything. And I know this sounds crazy, but I don't think the Israelites were the only people who were delivered when they walked out of Egypt. I believe that there were people who witnessed what happened, and all of a sudden their gods of water and of sun and of livestock, they're not near as powerful as they were. So we're going to look at that in the next couple of weeks. We're almost out of time, but I have some really great news. I hope it's going to work out for us. I just visited with Kara Love, and she has taught her class the 10 plagues in song. And so we're going to see if we can have the young kids come up in the next week or so and sing for us the 10 plagues, and hopefully you can learn it and you can join us in the coming weeks as we look through all the different plagues and how God is powerful. Please remember that whether we're waiting in the doctor's office, whether we're waiting in line, whether we're waiting in the car, it is an opportunity to wait for God. And in doing so, we can trust in Him and we can have faith in Him. Thank you all for joining us here. I do want to close out in prayer, and we'll be dismissed for the morning. God, I thank you again for being a God who doesn't just simply throw things at us and give us whatever we want, but you're a God who draws us into relationship. That you want to come to know you, to trust in you, and ultimately, because of that waiting, to have hope in you and your Son Jesus and the resurrection that has been promised to us all. And so, Lord, as we find ourselves in 2021 waiting for red to go to yellow, to go to green, waiting for restaurants to open, waiting for life to resume. More than that, Lord, I just pray that we wait for you so that you might be glorified as we come to trust in you each and every day. It's in Jesus' name that I pray. Amen.